time for summer, you guys. I've got my root beer float cake. This one, it's got root beer flavoring in the entire cake. It's in the cake layers, it's in the drip, it's in the frosting, plus there's fresh whipped cream on top, of course a cherry, and root beer float marshmallows. To start off, I'm putting the cake on a cake board with the cake top side up. That's the part that I've already leveled. And now I'm adding some frosting, about a cup of the root beer frosting in the center. And you'll see I'll dollop it right in the center. And from there, I'm pushing outwards. This way I'm covering the crumbs and pushing that frosting over them rather than bringing the frosting in from the sides and gathering crumbs. As I level out the frosting and get a really good smooth top here, I'm going to make a little bit of an edge around the frosting, around the cake layer, so that I can drizzle a little bit of the root beer drip and it won't spill out. Next, I'm adding about 2 tablespoons of the root beer drip on top of the frosting. I'm going to spread it out with my offset icing spatula to again get a nice level, even surface. Now it's time to repeat those steps, putting another cake layer on top of the filling, top side up, adding another cup of the root beer frosting, some more drip, and then we'll add our final cake layer. And remember, the final cake layer goes top side down so we keep the smooth surface on the top for frosting. And now it's time to apply a thin coat of root beer frosting all over the cake. This is going to be a crumb coat where we're locking in the crumbs. We're going to put it in the freezer for about 10 minutes just to set that crumb coat and prepare it for the final coat of frosting. And remember, this doesn't need to look pretty. This is just a thin coat of frosting to lock in those crumbs. But I do want to take the cake scraper and go around the cake. And I'm holding it really close to the cake, about a 45-degree angle, and using my left hand to turn the cake table and barely moving my right hand with the cake scraper to get a clean edge. Next, I use the offset icing spatula to just drag in the tops of the cake. See that frosting that's just kind of a little bit above the cake? I hold the cake spatula just parallel to the cake and drag it in really quickly. After the crumb coat has set in the freezer for about 10 minutes, it's time to apply the final coat of frosting. This one I'm just going to go around with a straight icing spatula along the sides, add a good coat around the entire cake, then add some to the top as well. I'm not using a second cake board on top of this cake to create a sharp edge. Instead, I'm going to show you how to get that good sharp edge using the offset icing spatula. After going around the cake once with frosting and getting some on top, I'm taking the cake scraper around the cake just to see where I need to even out some of that frosting. So you can see there in the front I have some gaps. I'm going to just take some extra frosting and fill in those areas only and continue to scrape around the cake. Something to remember too with the cake scraper, every time I go around the cake, I clean off the cake scraper. I want a really clean cake scraper so that none of the dry frosting or excess frosting on there pulls away from the fresh frosting on the cake. So a clean cake scraper is really important every time you go around the cake. You can see how scraping the frosting around the cake pushed some of that frosting up over the edge. And now I'm using an offset icing spatula, holding it parallel to the cake and very close to the frosting, and just dragging in that excess frosting. And that's giving me a nice edge around the cake. Again, I'm always cleaning off the icing spatula in between every swoop I'm taking. And I'm doing that pretty quick and just pulling it into the center so I don't create any big lines. There it is, parallel, and just pull it right in and swipe it away. Now to create some texture around the cake, I'm just using the offset icing spatula again and holding it vertical to the cake and just pulling up the frosting. I'm going to go around the entire cake doing the same motion right next to each line over and over again. And what would one of my cakes be without some drip? This is a root beer drip made with root beer baking chips and some heavy cream. And this one is a little trickier because my edges and sides of the cake aren't super smooth and sharp, so it doesn't go exactly perfectly down, but it creates a really fun look once I get the whipped cream on there. And let's be honest, it's just about how it tastes, and this drip tastes amazing. I'm going to add more of that root beer drip to the top of the cake and just cover all of that frosting with my offset icing spatula to smooth things out. And also note that this drip is cooled down a bit. It's not right out of the microwave. It's not hot, otherwise I'd melt the frosting. So this is cooled down for about 10 minutes before I actually apply it to the cake. So now it's time for the whipped cream on top. I started with just a round tip, but didn't love what was going on. It was a little bit hard to get the look I was going for, and it kind of started looking like marshmallows, but I wanted to look like whipped cream. That's what you put on top of a root beer float. So I switched to the Wilton 1M tip and started to just pull that tip along the sides, kind of create some swirl look, and just layer on top to make it look like a big swirl of whipped cream. Next, I'm adding some root beer float marshmallows that I found at the grocery store. They're by the brand Smoshmallows. So these are just for a fun little look, and I love that they were also root beer flavor. I'm going to add some more whipped cream, and then of course a cherry on top, some chocolate shavings, some more root beer baking chips, and then I've got some fun little straws you'll see too.